me shortly explain my setup here. So I have my camera here. So now I'm looking at you, but I will be working on my main screen. That's the reason I'm looking a little bit like off the camera. So, and then I also have like a little cheating monitor, which is my laptop, which is on my right. So don't wonder why I'm looking maybe just a little bit around. It's just because of my setup here. And as a first step, I think I will just go ahead and share my screen. Because I do have prepared a little bit of presentation, but it's not like the typical PowerPoint presentation. It's actually in web application. And I also shared like this link also in the chat. So it's like the first message in the chat. So if you want to have a look at this right now, or maybe also afterwards, that's a presentation. But we will actually not spend too much time here on the presentation itself because this is kind of like a live session. And that's the reason I'm also a little bit nervous because we will be doing some live coding as well. Yeah, as Sasa mentioned, feel free to have any questions. Just leave them in the chat. I will then have a look at the chat once in a while and then answer your questions. All right. Yeah, and with that, I think let's get started. So today's topic will be how to turn Excel spreadsheets into powerful applications with Python. And we don't need, I said it shortly in the beginning, but I think it was before the recording. We don't need much code actually to build some internal tools and powerful applications with Python. And to show you what I mean, I actually think it might be easier if I'm just showing you some examples. So if you have seen those examples and you don't like what you're seeing and you might be thinking, oh, I might be in the wrong workshop here, then I don't want to waste more of your time, then you can leave. But if you find it interesting, then definitely stick around because we will build those kind of application I'm about to show you from scratch. So the first part will be now this demo section here. Then I will explain briefly how everything works behind the scenes. And once we know how everything works, we will do a little bit of live demo where I will be coding like a one simple application from scratch. All right. If that sounds good, then let's get started with the first example. And this is just like a normal Excel file. And in here I have kind of an email bike sender. Now the interesting part is here you might want to send out some personalized emails for your business. It doesn't need to even be your business. It could be also for Le Wagon to, for example, inform their students via email. There is, of course, professional software out there who can do all those kind of things. But if you wanted to, you can also do it directly in Excel. So the interesting part here is that you can make it dynamic. For example, here on the left side, I have the company name, the contact person, and then some information about the email. So this is like an upcoming price change for some product, and I just want to inform my customer or clients about those price changes. So here in the subject, I'm using some Excel formulas to, for example, combine the product with the effective date. And if I take a look at my body cell here, I even have a little bit more cells which I'm combining, like the contact person, the product, the old price, the new price, and the effective date. So the final body will look like this, which is like a personal email now to Alice. And I've just dragged down this formula. So in total now I have 3 emails I want to send out. And to do that, I will be clicking here on the send emails button. And now we get a little success message. Now for the receiver, this is my demo email. So it's coding it's fun.tetsuda@gmail.com. Please don't write me any email on that address because I'm not checking it. It's just for demo purposes. But what we can do now, we can actually navigate to that inbox from Gmail. And if I click the refresh button here, we get the first email here, a second email, and I think after some time, there might be also the third email. But let's have a look at the second one already. So here you can now see this one was for Charlie. All the values which we have defined in Excel are now coming through my Gmail inbox here. And I think the third email might be still somewhere stuck, but eventually it will also arrive. Anyways, let's continue with the next example, which will be creating some invoice. So the idea here is, once again, if you have a small business, for example, and you want to generate some invoices, there are, of course, some tools out there to do those kind of things. But once again, if you wanted to, you can also do it directly in Excel. So how this works, those are just normal Excel cells, which are just formatted and also included some formulas in there, like today's date, and adding, for example, for the due date, 7 days to today's date, and adding some notes and some payment terms. And on the right side, this is now an Excel table. So here I have some um, items which I want to charge for. And now to create the invoice, I will click on this Create Invoice button here. Once I do this, you will now see here, this cell has now a download link to my invoice. So when I open it, and if I scroll down a little bit, this is now a PDF invoice, which is saved on my cloud, and everything is formatted like in professional invoice. So we've got all the input from Excel, but we created a PDF file, which is now saved on the cloud. So here you can now see, for example, um, my address, then the billing to address, once again, which is coming from Excel. And then once again, we have our date from today, 7 days to it. And down here are now all the invoice items, for example, in a really nicely formatted way, as well as our notes and our payment terms. So that's the second example. And by the way, for those examples, there's really minimal code needed. We do need a little bit of Python code, but it's really minimal. All right. Next up, and I think this is like a fun example here, it's creating dynamic web pages directly from Excel. So I know from Le Wagon, really popular for web development, but if you wanted to, you can also do some web development right in Excel. So the idea here is maybe for this training, I want to get some feedback. And of course, I can also send out like a link, like a Microsoft Forms link, for example, and ask for feedback. But once again, if you wanted to, you can just build like a little tool like this to create your own online survey directly in Excel. The idea here is that once again, those cells are dynamic. I can type whatever I want in there. So I have a title, the question one, which is in this example, what's your name? Question two, what's one thing you learned today and what surprised you? And the last question might be if you got any random thoughts or feedback. So if I now click this create survey button, it will now create a live survey link for me. And when I open this, this is now a live website. So you can navigate to this website, and I will actually also paste it in the chat if I find the chat again here on my other screen. Just a second. Ah, there it is. Okay. So let me fill it out myself. So Sven, nothing. All good so far, and I will submit it. So we will now redirect it to my thank you page. But what's interesting now, this entry has been now saved in my database, and I can also fetch the entries from my database right in Excel. Now, for the database, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be like a simple Google spreadsheet. It could be an Airtable. It really doesn't matter. For me, if I'm clicking now here, fetch the survey results. Oh, I can see already the link is working. So we've got my entry here. This one was like a little test one, which I did before our session here. But this is now my entry here. And I can see already two more entries. And maybe there are more. No, not yet. All right. So this is now another example. And lastly, we can also create custom Excel formulas in Excel. So if you're working with Excel, you know, of course, like the sum formula, maybe the VLOOKUP formula, and all those fun formulas. But in fact, if you wanted to, you can also create your own custom functions, and I will also show you how that works. Now, I think the today's world, everybody is talking about AI. So I think here it's nice touch that we also have a little AI formula So I call this formula ask AI, and then we can run any prompt. So when I was in Le Wagon, I always had difficulties, or not difficulties, but maybe I was wondering how to pronounce it. And now if you wanted to, you can ask AI directly in Excel. Um, so yeah, Le Wagon, it's pronounced Le Wagon. Right. So this is now a little AI formula, which you can also create directly in Excel. So those are the demos. And once again, we will build one demo from scratch in this talk. But before I show you how that works, I will shortly switch back to the presentation, which is here. So if you see in this, you might be wondering, how does it actually work? If you have worked with Excel before, you might be familiar with VBA, so Visual Basic for Application. But we are not using any VBA here because it's in the title. We will use Python for that. Now, not so long ago, like a couple of months ago, Felix Sumstein has created an Excel add-in that lets you run Python directly in Excel. And this Excel add-in, it's called Excel Wings Lite. Now, the interesting part here is, even though we are running Python in Excel, you don't have to install Python on your machine. Because I can tell you from my own experience, when I created tools for my colleagues, for example, at work, there was really one big pain point that you always had to install Python on their machine to use the tool. But with this add-in, you don't have to do it. Basically, you just have to install the add-in, then you can write your Python code, and the Python is running kind of in a sandbox environment. For the technical ones, for you, it's using WebAssembly and Pyodide. But just like a little side note here. So this is what we're going to use, this Excel lighted in. And the whole concept will be that we will build our UI, so our user interface in Excel. So just like what you have seen for the email sending or for the creating the invoices, we will build like a little UI. You can style it however you want, use some colors, merge cells and all those fun stuff. Then after we have done the UI, we will take the input from the UI and process it in Python. And here you can basically go two routes. So you can do all your logic, like the sending emails or creating websites. You could, of course, do everything in Python, but I promised you in the beginning, we will use really minimal code. And how we are doing is we will just write a little bit of code that we get the data out of Excel and sending it to a no-code tool. So no-code tools, maybe you used them before, but I will show you also the one I will be using. That could be, for example, Zapier.com, Mate.com, NAN, or in my case, I will be using Public Connect. And once again, I will show you what I mean by this in just a second when we come to the live part. But this is overall like the workflow. Building the UI, getting the cell values from Excel, using Python, and then sending that data to a no-code tool. And then afterwards, we can actually also return the result back to Excel. So this is what you have seen, for example, with the email example. After we run our script, we got like a little success message back in Excel. And the same goes also for the invoice, for example. We've got like a download link to the PDF file. So we can also return the result back to Excel. Now, before we dive into the live example, some of you might be now wondering, okay, that's cool, but why would you actually use Excel for that and not build, for example, a web application? Because obviously you can also do that, build a web application, host it somewhere, and then run all your automations there, or maybe buy some tools to do that kind of things. Well, my answer to this is, if you're working in a large corporation, not even a large corporation, like almost every company is using Excel somehow. And it doesn't matter if it's like the finance department, engineering department, HR department, everybody is kind of using Excel and everybody knows somehow how to use Excel. So everybody can input some data and also can press a button. So there's not much training required if you're building some internal tools for your management or for your colleagues or just for yourself. Another point is that your data you're going to process, for example, with the emails or with the invoice, might already live inside Excel. So instead of taking out the data from Excel and putting it in your web application whatsoever, you can actually build those kind of tools just on top of Excel or basically inside Excel. And last but not least, and I touched on this one already, you don't need any complex setup for this whole thing. Basically, you just need the Excel wings lighted in, and if you wanted to, like a no-code automation tool as well. But other than that, there's not need for any servers, any complex setup, and not the need for installing Python locally on your machine. All right. So this is now the basic idea. This is how it works, and this is also why we are going to use Excel. All right. And with that, we are switching gears now, and this is now the most nervous part for me because because we're gonna do some live coding now. Yeah, and for that, first I will shortly check the chat if something is in there. All right, so with which Excel version supports Python coding? Yeah, 365, that's correct, but actually because we're using not mm, so maybe I should say there is from Microsoft an official integration which is called Python and Excel. And maybe I should mention that. Don't get confused with that. Those are actually two separate things we're talking about here. So for Microsoft, the Python and Excel, if you've seen it or you heard it before, this is more towards data analysis. That means you can take your Excel table and using common panda, libraries like pandas or NumPy to do your analysis and also the charting and Matplotlib and Seaborn, for example. It is not so much used for automation, so you cannot really connect to APIs with that or copy pasting data from one sheet to another sheet. It is actually not possible with Python and Excel, so it has some limitation. Now, this Excel Wings Lighted in, which I'm going to show you, this is more familiar with like VBA. So you can do some automation within Excel. But if you wanted to, you can actually also do some data analysis. So basically you get like the best of both worlds in here because you're not only limited to the data analysis part, you can also do it with the Excel Wings Lighted in, and it's free. So you don't even need the 365 like a subscription. You can also use Office 2021. This is, I think, like the minimum version you need in order to run it. So if you have like Office 2016 or something, then most likely it won't work. But Office 2021 and above, including 365, including all the web version, including macOS, it will work on there. All right. Okay, next question. Before we move on to the live demo, what tool did you use for the online presentation slides? Looks very nice. Yeah, Claude. So I'm not a web developer to be honest. So I basically just prompted it. It's like vibe coding it. And I think like after a couple of minutes, I had my presentation here. Yeah, basically I use Windsurf with Claude 4. I think that's nowadays how it goes. Yeah. Anyway, with that, let's move on to the live demo. So if you want to get started, if you want to follow along, you can also do that. You just open a blank Excel workbook. And from here, you want to go to the Home tab, and you will see within there, there's like an add-ins button. And if you click on it, you can now extend Excel with some add-ins. And we are going to look at the add-in, which is called Excel Rings Lite. Now, in my case, I already have it installed and the icon looks like this, Excel Wings Lite. But if you don't have it installed, I assume you don't have it right now, you just click on the add button and then it will be added to your workbook. And that's it basically. Then the installation is done because afterwards you will have a new button in your ribbon, which is called Excel Wings Lite. And when you click on it, it might take a second or two to load, But then here on the right side, this task pane is now where we are going to write our Python code. All right. I think I will try to make it a little bit bigger so that you can see it, because otherwise I might think it might be a little bit hard to read. Let's see. All right. Yeah, so the idea here is now in this little editor, you can write now your Python code in there. And this just works like a normal text editor, basically. So you can just write your normal Python code, and here on the other tab, you will see your requirements file where you can install packages. Once again, it is not running locally, so it's using Pyodite. So basically, with WebAssembly, everything runs in a sandbox browser environment. But before going too technical here, let me just shortly show you some examples. So if you install it for the first time, you will actually get already some examples directly loaded in here. So you can see here this little button, the Hello World example. If you click on the little arrow, you will also see the other examples here. So there's one with the C1 example and one for the insert custom functions example. But I think it might make sense to just start at the top with the Hello World example. So here you will see, if you've used Python before, this is just like a normal Excel formula, Python formula. The only difference here is it has like a little decorator on top. It's like a script decorator. And by doing this, it will appear in this drop-down menu here. So let's test it out, for example. If I type also script in here and define a new function, let's call it test. I will now see up here that it's also appearing in there. All right. Now after that, we've got an argument here. So the book argument, which is kind of a little bit like a boilerplate. So you always have to input the book argument to access all the Excel objects, such as the current book, obviously, the sheet, ranges, tables, cells, and so on and so forth. And if you have VBA before, this syntax here might look very familiar to you. So let me walk you through it. First, I'm declaring here a variable which is called cell. And then afterwards, we take this book argument. And once we do it, we got access to the sheet. So for now, for this Hello World example, I want to use the active sheet and the cell A1. And then within the cell A1, I want to input the value Hello World and also change the cell color. In this case here, it's yellow. So I think it might be easier if I'm just executing it. So I'm selecting it here and running it, and you will see that we now have here Hello World. So that means we just run Python code directly in Excel, and this is kind of the main idea here is. This is also what I've meant with you can now, if you wanted to, write all your logic in here using Python, but I will show you in just a second that we are going to use a no-code tool that we don't have to write that much Python code, but it's up to you. If you wanted to, you can do it. And also, I think now it's a good opportunity coming back to the comparison with Python and Excel, which was native now included from Microsoft, comparing it also here to this Excel being slided in. Because I told you, you can also do data analysis with it. We are not touching too much on data analysis in this talk because this is more focusing on automating stuff, but just to show you how that looks like. And here, for example, we have a CSV file which is stored on the internet. It's a penguins data set from the Seaborn library. And Excel Wing Slide makes it actually super easy to work also with pandas data frames. So first I'm loading here the data frame in a variable called df. And then just like what you've seen before, I'm using the book argument. And here I can access the sheets and add a new sheet, for example. And in this sheet, just like before, I can now change the value, the font size, the color, the font itself, and then also return the data frame as a table and doing now all kinds of plotting things, for example, here the Seaborn library. So let me show you how that looks like. So if I'm selecting it and clicking this button here, we should now have a new sheet. And I will zoom out a little bit here. Now we've got the Seaborn library data set, like the penguins data set, in a new sheet in an Excel table. We've got the title in Comic Sans, and we've got like here the join plot, which is inserted as an image. So once again, if you wanted to, you can also do some data analysis with that. All right. Now with that, let's actually create our own little script and start from scratch because I think it might be just a little bit easier to follow along instead of just explaining lines by lines. So for that, let me actually get rid of everything in here except maybe for the inputs. Also the comments here, don't need this. C1 pandas numpy, don't need. Let's just start completely from scratch here. So just like before, I will have my script decorator. And for this example, I thought we might replicate my first demo example, which was sending emails. Yeah, for that, let me define a new function, send email. And first we will have our book parameter. All right. Then as a next step, I will define which worksheet I will be working with. So you can access this by going to our book. And in here you can now see it also supports IntelliSense. That means you can see which kind of methods or properties are available to our book object here. Now, once again, if you're new to Python, and I promised in the beginning we don't need much Python, this is really just a little bit of Python code. So I think we might need 5 or 6 lines of Python code. And if you don't understand it, you can always obviously also go to ChatGPT, go for more explanation, or just take this kind of the boilerplate code. Because if you're following along, this will be very similar to all the other automations, because later on we will use a no-code tool to do all the heavy lifting for us, like sending emails, creating invoice, and so on and so forth. So don't get too scared here if you just see a little bit of Python code. But anyways, with that said, from my book currently, I want to access our sheets. And from the sheets now, I can use the active sheet. Now basically I have access to my active sheet in Python. And with that, let me shortly build our little user interface here. So for the email, I want to define our receiver, then our subject line, and our body. And later on, I want to know if the email was successfully sent or not. So I will have a little result cell down here. All right. Now with that, I will define another variable here, which will be our receiver. And the receiver cell, so we will later on take this data and send it to our no-code tool. But for that, we need to know where the data is coming from. So our receiver cell is currently in the cell C3. So what we can do is we take the sheet, type in here C3, and from that cell, what do we want? We want to get the value. And just to test it out, I can also print it. So let me just type in my name here, click the send email. And now down here, this is now kind of like in console. So you can see the output if you're printing something. So here I can now see it was successfully because I can see here now the value Sven. Now the problem with this setup is once I, for example, insert a new cell, now my receiver is in cell C4. So that means if I ever do any changes here, I also need to update it in my code because if I run my script now again, you will see it's none because it's just an empty cell. So to make it a little bit more flexible, I will now use named ranges. So you can give, maybe you didn't know, but in Excel, you can actually give a single cell or even multiple cells, like a range, you can give it a name. So for that, you just click into the cell, going up here in the name box, and then I can type in receiver and press enter. And now I can also select it from here, and I can see that this name is now referring to my cell in C4. And the good thing here is now, even if I insert new rows, and if I select it again, it will still now go to the correct cell, which is now in C5. So we will do this now also for the other cells. So it's not C3 anymore. Instead, we will now use the named range, which is receiver. So, and we can also test it again. So now we still get the same result as before. So let me do this also for the other input. So we will have our subject. And even I haven't defined it yet, I can already type in here our subject. And then we've got our body. And also in here, it will be our body. And now I will just click on the cell for the subject, go in here once again in the name box, entering subject and pressing enter. And last but not least, we will do the same also for the body, pressing enter. And actually, I will also do it already for the result. We don't need it yet, but we will need it later. All right. With that, we have now 4 named ranges, which you can see in here. And now as a next step, what I want to do, I want to take this input from Excel and send it to our automation tool. And here, once again, it can be any automation tool you like. So there are a couple of those on the market. There's, for example, Zapier, where you can create your automation flow. There's make.com. There's NAN, which is open source, and you can actually also self-host it if you want to. Or in my case, I will be using Pabbly Connect. Now, why am I using Pabbly? And by the way, it's not sponsored by Pabbly, but they do have a lifetime deal, and I'm using this tool kind of heavily every month. So for me, it makes sense not to paying like a monthly subscription. For me, I just have like a one-time payment, and then I'm using it. But it doesn't matter which tool you're using. This is the point I want to come across here. So for this, let me go to my dashboard in Pabbly, and I think it should be over here. So this is now how it looks like, and you can also see I'm using this tool quite heavily because for this month now, I'm using now over 3,000 of those kind of little automation flows. But if you also want to use Pabbly, this is how it looks like in the user interface, and you just want to click on the Create Workflow button. Now they do have a new workflow builder, but I'm still a little bit old school. All my workflows have been built with the old classic one. So also for this workshop, I will be using the classical builder here. I will give it a name. You can name it whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. I will just call mine send email. Now here I will make a little break. So the idea is now that we take our Excel data, because now we have access to it, and then we're going to send this data to Pabbly. But how are we going to do this? There's something called an webhook. And webhook is basically like an URL. It's like a link you can click on, and you can send data to this webhook URL. And once you've got the data, you can then process the data, write in your no-code tool. Once again, in my case, it will be then Pabbly Connect. Let me show you how that looks like. So here in Pabbly, I've got the webhook. So I will just take the first trigger event here, which is catch the webhook. And now Pabbly, and by the way, also all the other tools, make.com, NAN, Zapier, all of those tools will have this kind of feature. triggering your workflow with a webhook. So what I will be doing, I will be copying this webhook URL to my clipboard. And then back in Excel, we want to send our data to that webhook. And for that, we are going to use the request package from Python. So for that, we need to install it. We don't need pandas, matplotlib, and cbon, so I will just get rid of those. And instead, I will import the request package. And up here, I also want to make sure to import the request package. Should be with an S, I think. Right. Ah, the S is missing here. Okay, now it looks good. So you have seen I was missing the S, for example, in here. And the good thing, you will automatically see there's an error then also indicated if I'm missing it, for example. So that's the reason I was a little bit like confused here, but now you can see it installed the request package. All right. And with that, we now want to send the data, and this will be in post request. But first, we need to define what kind of data we want to send, because currently we're just accessing the values from Excel, but we haven't specified which kind of values we want to send actually. So I will declare another variable, which will be our data, and this is now the data we are going to send. So I want to send our receiver, and the receiver will be also our receiver we have defined here. Next up, I want to also send over to Pabbly our subject line, which will be again here our subject variable. And last but not least, we also want to send our body, which will be body. By the way, you don't have to name it like me, like receiver is receiver. You can name it whatever you want, but you should name it in a way that later on it will be easy for you to identify um, in Public Connect what the cell value holds. So that's the reason I'm also calling it receiver. All right. And with that, let's send the data now. So we will use the request package. We will send a post request. And here is now the URL where we want to send the data to. So that's in our case, not import request. I need to go back to Pabbly. The one I had copied to my clipboard. So this is this URL now. So let me copy it to my clipboard. Once again, go back in here and paste it. So now we've got this URL. And now we just need to define which data we want to send. So this will be JSON, will be data. All right, and that's about it. So now we can give it a little test run, but maybe I should also fill out the receiver here. And for this, I will be using my test email, which is codingisfun.testuser@gmail.com. The subject will be test, the body will be test body, and now I can send the email. Now, ideally, we shouldn't get any error message. And this is good because currently we're not doing anything with the response. We're just sending the data. But hopefully, if I'm going now back to Pabbly, we should now have received some information, which is right here. So we received a response. And now you can see our subject, receiver, and the body we have specified in Excel. So basically, we have now taken the data from Excel, sending it over now to our no-code automation tool. And now this is now where all the fun part begins, because now we have access to all those variables or the data. And yeah, now you can connect it, as the name suggests, Public Connect, with any kind of tool you would like. So this is now kind of like the second step. So you can build your own workflow here. And there are hundreds and thousands of applications you can use. So for example, if you wanted to, we can now use Gmail. But for the web page, what you have seen with the survey result, for example, there's a built-in tool from Pabbly, which is, mm, I think, let me search for it, maybe page. Ah, here it is. Dynamic web page from Pabbly. Now, I don't want to create a web page now, but just that you have seen how my other example worked with the survey. So here you can now input, for example, some HTML code. So for me, I will just use an H1 header here. And between it, I can now access our variables, which we were sending over from Excel. So I can just take, for example, here the subject line. And now Pabbly is giving me this website here. And if I open it in the browser, you will see we created now the website, a live website. And this is basically how I did also with the survey. I took the result from Excel and created then um, the web page. Obviously, the code was a little bit more sophisticated than a simple H1 header, but I just used once again ChatGPT for that. All right. So with that, as I said, we don't actually want to create a web page. What we want to do, and it depends really what you want to do now. So you could, for example, also use Twilio to send SMS. Use your email marketing tool like SendFox, so or Mailchimp, whatever you want here. You can now define the application. But in my case, I would just go ahead and use my Gmail account to send out the email. So here within Gmail, you have different options. In my case, I want to send an email, so I will just select this event here and connect it. Now, if you're using Pabbly for the first time, you first, of course, make sure you have a connection between Gmail account and Pabbly. Now, I've done that already, so that's the reason I can here go ahead and select my existing account. If you don't have it, you just add a new connection and follow the setup process on the screen if you connect with Gmail. But in my case, once again, I've already connected it, so I can click on Save here. All right, and now it's actually pretty easy because in the recipient email address, I can just click on the cell here, click in our webhook, and the receiver will be just what we have specified, which will be my email address here. If you wanted to, we can also a little bit make it more complex with CC and BCC and so on and so forth. But for this, I will keep it really simple. So the next thing will be just our subject. Once again, I will select it here. It says test. And last but not least, we will also need our email body, which is in here. And now I can save and send the test request. All right. So now I get the response from Gmail. So Gmail is now saying if everything was successfully or not. And you can see the result here with a bunch of details. Now, I think it might be easier if you're just going to my Gmail account and checking it. It's over here. By the way, here's also the other emails which I've sent. And the latest one is now our test. This is our test buddy. So now that we have that, we can actually test it one more time. So let's say, for example, test buddy 2 and test 2, and then click here once again on send email. Once again, we didn't get any error message, which is good, and I will come back to the result in just a second. But for now, I'm actually more curious to see if we actually also get our second email. And here it is. So now we just triggered our workflow from Excel, so our Pabbly workflow, and then Pabbly was taking care of sending the email. So now we have our second test email here. Now to make it a little bit easier, instead of just clicking on this button, it would be nice, just like in my demos, to have like a dedicated button also here. And you can easily do this also. You can just take any shape you want. So let's take here this rectangle, for example, and let's call it send email. Let's make it bold. Now the trick here is that you want to right click on the shape and you want to link it and you want to click on place in this document. And then here you want to type in the cell reference, which is kind of below the button. So what I mean by this is the button here is now, for example, on top of cell, I would say B10, for example. So what you can do here is you can just type in here B10, and you can also give this button, which is just our rectangle shape, also a name, for example, send email. So once we have that, we can go back to our script decorator here and extend it a little bit further with our button. So that means first I will define or input the name of our shape, which was button send email. Then I want to say in which sheet this button is living in, which is sheet number 3. And then also here, the cell reference, which is B10. So if I'm now clicking on this shape here, you might have shortly seen that the script was executed and that ideally we should now have also another email. I didn't change it, so we should also got our test subject 2 and test body 2. All right. And with that, we are almost done. And just looking at the time, I think we can do it in the last minutes, and then I will also answer some of the questions. The last thing I want to do is going back to Powerplay and actually also define a response so that I can give the response back to Excel. And how this works is, as a last step of my workflow here, I can have the so-called data forwarder. And in here, there's an action event which is called return custom response to the source. So what it means is I can return now some data from the webhook application, which was calling our webhook, so which is Excel in this case. So let me click on here and connect it. And now I can define what I want to return. And this will be once again in JSON format. So this could be anything you want. In my case, I would just call it, for example, result. And for the result, I will just take whatever Gmail has given me here. So I think if I scroll down a little bit, there's like a response, the result status, which is success. And I think it might make sense to return this kind of result back. So I just save it. Now to capture the result back in our workflow, back in our Excel file, what we can do is we can access our result cell. So this was in the sheet, and we gave it the name result, as you might remember in the beginning. And the value here is now our response. And from the response, I think we also should import the JSON package, because the response from Powerplay, it's coming in JSON format. So we will just import JSON here. So let me get the JSON. And from the JSON, I want to get the result variable. All right. So this will be now our final test and the final test body here. And let's see if this is actually working. Yeah, almost. We've got like a little error because of my bad English. So I've got a little typo here. So this would be response. And let's test it one more time. Yeah. So now we see the result here, which is now a success. And the cool thing obviously is, if you wanted to, you can use all the cool fun Excel stuff, like using conditional formatting. So if the text, for example, contains success, it should be like green, for example, to make like a really intuitive user interface. Um, and I think we should be good here, but if I'm just checking it one more time, we should get our, yeah, final test here. Um, this was the email from before. It was just the error because of the response, but the email was still sent out, so that's the reason we have it twice here. But that's overall how you can um, use Python in Excel. Now, obviously, we just touched a little bit here on the surface because there's only 1 hour, and in 1 hour, I can only show you like a little bit what's possible. But I would encourage you, if you got now interested in this, just install the Excel Wings Lighted in and go through the um, sample code in there. And if you wanted to, and I've done this also, you can also just copy and paste the example code and paste it into ChatGPT or Claude and ask it for your specific use case, what you want to achieve basically. My goal here was just to give you some inspiration and what's possible, and also this it in, I think um, nobody really talks about it. It was just released a couple of months ago, but I think it's super powerful if you want to build some internal tools, either for yourself, for your manager, or for your colleagues. And the cool thing here is also this code now, what we have written, is living directly inside the workbook. So we don't have to save it as a Mac-enabled workbook, for example. And anybody with this Excel, with it in, can execute the functions, so the tools you have created. So you can basically just take this workbook, the code is already in the workbook, and then you can just send it out to your colleagues or friends. They can open it. If they have it installed, the add-in, they can just click a button and it works. All right, and with that, let me actually go back to our chat here. So I was just scrolling up a little bit here. So how about attachment could be added? Yeah, that's a really good question. So what you could do, for example, is you can have define here another cell, for example, the attachment. And now Excel Wing Slide doesn't have access to your file system on your computer. It's kind of a security measurement basically because everything runs in the browser and it doesn't have it's in the roadmap actually on the roadmap. But currently it's not possible that Excel Wing Slide is accessing your file system. So you cannot say on my C drive or my desktop, pick that file. But what you could do is you could put it on your Google Drive or somewhere else on a cloud, and you have a download link basically, like a direct link to the file. And then you can also have it in here, like call it attachment, and then back in Public Connect, basically, what you can do. If you're going back to the send email, you can then, once you've got the link, you can input it in here as an attachment. So here you can have like multiple URLs, you can basically attach it. Okay, next one. Yeah, can you please describe the required file requirements.txt? So in Python, basically, if you're not familiar with that, um, somebody has written a lot of code and they put it like in a little package so that you can reuse the code. One of the really popular packages are, for example, pandas for data analysis. Now, when you run Python, you don't want to run all the available packages which are out there. Basically, depending on your use case, you want to install certain packages. So this is basically what you have done here. So for me, as I wanted to send some data to Public Connect, I needed to send the data via internet, basically via HTTPS. And this is possible with a package called requests. But to use it, I first need to install it basically. So I define it in my requirements.txt file. And there are also some limitations which are coming from Pyodite itself. So you cannot run every single package which are available on PyPy, for example. There are some limitations with that. And there's more information on that also on the Excel Wing slide documentation, which I should, by the way, also put in the chat to see that how everything works in Excel Wing slide. Let me put it also in here. I think I have it also open. So this is the documentation. Really good documentation with some common errors, FAQs, troubleshooting tips. So definitely have a look at this, and I will also put it here in the chat. All right. Then next up. Yeah, the next one is, yeah, about privacy. So Public Connect itself is ready for GDPR, and it really depends on the tool you're using. Basically, it's up to you, right? You don't have to send the data, by the way, to a no-code tool. This is just like one use case example in order to avoid writing a lot of Python code. That's basically why I'm using this kind of no-code automation tool. If you wanted to, you don't have to do it at all. I mean, if you wanted to, you can also write all your Python code directly in here. That's the editor for, right? But when it comes to privacy, it's really up to the tool you're using. So for example, if you're using NAN, it's an open source package, not a package, but an open source tool, which you can self-host on your own server. So if you have an on-premise server, for example, you need the license then, I think, of course, if you're running in an enterprise environment. But that said, you can do that as well. So you can run your own server and also connect it with that. So everything kind of like stays within your own security levels. So that's not a problem at all, in my opinion. Next one is Mailchimp okay too? Yeah, basically you can use any application you want. I just wanted to have something to show. So I think sending email is kind of easy to grasp because we are doing it on a daily basis. But once again, if you're going back to Public Connect here, or and that said also all the other no-code tools, there's so many automation tools here. So it's like thousands of applications you can connect. So if you're just scrolling through here, can be connecting to your to-do list, to YouTube, whatever it is basically. So you can build your own little workflow in here. And this is kind of like the power of those kind of tools, right? Yeah. So the next question is how to use the company's email server to send emails with company's sender email address. Yeah, very, very good question. By the way, all the questions are very good. Once again, here, you most likely then have an SMTP, for example. And if you have like the SMTP credentials, or if your own company server has like API access for sending emails, that could work too. And once again, you could, of course, go the route and sending it directly also from Papi or third-party tool. But if you wanted to, you can also use the built-in SNTP package from Python, and I'm not quite sure if it's actually running on Pyodide. This I haven't tested out, but you can test it out yourself basically with the SNTP package, which is directly baked in into Python um, to send out emails. So you can also use your own sender email address, and doesn't need to be Gmail. Next one from Katie. Do you have any tips on how to ensure the code is transparent to users who want to understand the calculation happening in the background? Well, I haven't done it. I'm not a good example here, but obviously you can also use comment boxes here. And this is also when we installed it for the first time, there was like a huge comment on top. So what you could do, for example, is just have some comments directly in the code. So getting the size values from Excel, whatever you want to put in there. Um, Yeah, but I think in many cases you actually do want to hide the code from itself from the end user. It really depends on the end user, obviously. But from my experience, if you don't have not technical end users, I'm not quite sure if they really want to see the code actually. Maybe in that case, might be better to hide and just use like the buttons, which I'm using here, because otherwise there might be just some confusion if they need to select from the drop-down menu the right code. So it might be easier to build like a really intuitive user interface and using buttons, just like I have done here, and then just send it to your end users. And if they wanted to, they can obviously also have a look at the code if they click on the icon. And if you want to have some comments, just use normal Python comments in there. All right. Yeah, I think we're like 5 minutes over time now. But this is basically what I wanted to show you. So once again, have a try yourself. Build your own little tools directly in Excel. You don't need any web servers. You can just give it a crack and see how it goes. And with that, thanks a lot for all your time. I know it's not the most fun watching another person doing some Excel stuff. But at least for me, it's fun. So yeah, thank you all for all your attention. And if you still have any questions, you can. This is now my plug here. Sorry, Sasha, I see you on the frame here. But if you want to connect with me in the online presentation, so this is now the link, and I'll just put it one more time because it's just on the really top. So I will just put it one more time here. If you go to connect with me, basically you have all the information you might need to find my YouTube channel, to find me on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me. My GitHub repo, my website where I'm actually selling Excel templates and add-ins, and also my email address if you want to reach out to me after the talk or you might have a question. So feel free to do that. Yeah. And then once again, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sven. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Let's give a huge round of virtual applauses to Sven. Thank you. So yeah, if you want to get access to Sven's presentation and files, please make sure to copy those links from the Zoom chat, because once we close the Zoom, it's gonna disappear. So we give maybe 1 or 2 minutes for you to click. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you so much, Sven. Again, looking forward to your next workshop. Maybe you can give your million views workshop next time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here.
Cool. Thank you so much, everyone, again, and have a great evening and good night for those of you based in Asian time zone, and have a good afternoon for those of you based in European time zone. Cool. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.